Hello and welcome to my channel, nice of you to be there. My name is Juan and today I'm here to talk about the books I read in the summer. So here in the Northern Hemisphere, summer is coming to an end, and I must say that it's been a typically warm and dry summer here in the Canary Islands. Not too hot, except for perhaps a few days in August, so it was perfect for reading. I managed to read many books in the summer months, too many probably, and because this video would be too long and too boring if I talked about all of them, I have selected the top 12 books that I have read this summer. I would also love to hear about your summer reads, so please leave a comment whether you have read any of the same books I have or not. I'm curious about what you all have read this summer. But let's go inside, shall we? Before I go into the best 12 books that I have read in the last 3 months, let me remind you that you can also follow me on Twitter and/or Instagram at Bookish Islander. Okay, so I started the summer season reading the Master and Margarita for the second time. I used to prefer not to read books more than once because, I thought there are so many books that I want to read that I thought that reading the same book twice would reduce the amount of time left to reading new books. But recently I have discovered something that I think it's obvious to many people watching this. Rereading is pleasurable. And probably most of the books I love are worth rereading. That was most definitely the case with The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. The reason that I read this novel again was that my review of the novel to this day is the most popular video here on my channel. I have no idea why that one review is so popular, and I have thought of shooting a new version of it many times. So I thought it might be a good idea to read The Master and Margarita again. And, I'm just so glad I did. I had even a better time with it the second time around. I think The Master and Margarita is one of those love it or hate it books. I think that you will either fall in love with it and have a great time reading it, or it will frustrate you. It is such a strange, multi-layered narrative. Actually, it is two narratives. One set in Moscow in the 1930s and the other one in biblical times in Judea. The Master and Margarita's plot can be summarized as follows. So the devil shows up in 1930s Moscow and wreaks havoc. But that does not begin to cover how amazingly strange this novel is. What I appreciated the most in this second reading were some of the set pieces. For instance, I love the novel's opening scene on a hot day in Moscow where a strange man, who we later find out is the devil, makes a prophecy that is soon fulfilled. And then in part 2, I love it when Margarita learns to fly. That's just one of the most beautiful things I have read, I think. So The Master and Margarita is such a rich text that is open to all kinds of interpretations, and I do love a polysemic text. Reading The Master and Margarita every so often might become a habit for me. I don't know yet. I know that some people read the same novel once a year as a tradition, and The Master and Margarita might become that for me. Now, as for doing a new review of it, it might be something I do on the anniversary of my channel or when I reach a milestone in subscribers. I don't know yet. But let me know if you would like me to do a new review of The Master and Margarita in the comment section down below. And obviously, let me know also if you would like me to do a proper review of any of the books that I am talking about today in this video. But let's move on to something completely different. I finally read Hurricane Season, or Temporada de Huracanes, by the Mexican writer Fernanda Melchor. Now, this novel was first published in 2017 and quickly became that rare thing that is a commercial and critical success. I kept putting it off, and I managed to avoid learning what Hurricane Season was about for years. And yes, I admit it, I tend to be skeptical about books that get hyped by the media, old and new, but I knew that I would read this at some point. I can read Spanish, and one of my wider interests is in Latin American literature, so I had to read Hurricane Season at some point, and this summer I did. I came across a copy in my local library, and I knew I had to seize the chance to tackle it once and for all. So Hurricane Season is a murder mystery set in a rural part of Mexico. The atmosphere is that of an oppressive small town where unimaginably horrific things happen. The characters all live in squalor. This novel is an unflinching portrayal of a section of society whose lives, I suspect, will be a world away from that of readers of the novel. It is not an easy read, but I utterly recommend it. Hurricane Season is a block of text. There are no paragraphs, and that can be off-putting to me, and I am sure it can be off-putting to other people too, because I think there is something reassuring about paragraphs, particularly short paragraphs, but this novel does not want its readers to feel reassured or comfortable, that's for sure. So Hurricane Season is an oppressive read that begins with a murder, and it contains a lot of violence. I don't know how this novel translates in other languages because I read it in Spanish, but I suspect that a lot of it is lost in translation because Melchor manages to write much of the novel in conversational Mexican Spanish. Now, if you can read Spanish, don't even think of reading Hurricane Season in translation. And if you can, I think you should read sections of it aloud. Now, Hurricane Season made me uncomfortable and left me feeling breathless. It is a hugely compelling novel, and it's made me curious to read more by Fernanda Melchor. Okay, the next novel I am going to talk about is completely different both stylistically and thematically. This summer, I read The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum, or Die verlorene Ehre der Katharina Blum, which is a novel by the German writer Heinrich Böll, which was first published in 1974. Now, Katharina Blum as a character is an innocent woman who works as a housekeeper. She gets involved with a man named Ludwig Goethen, who is accused of all kinds of crimes, from robbing a bank to being a terrorist. Katharina's life is then ruined by a tabloid reporter following the story. This novel is about how the sensationalist press in West Germany at the time deals with that news story. I like the structure of this novel. I went in knowing nothing about the plot, even though this novel has become somewhat of a contemporary classic, and there is even a famous movie adaptation of it, which I haven't watched. This novel takes place during a time of political paranoia in the West. You might remember that if you're old enough. And this is exploited by the journalist covering Katharina's case. But because The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum is such a short and compelling novel, I feel like I perhaps read it too quickly, so this might be another candidate for rereading in the future. And well, if you follow my videos, you might know that one of my main reading goals for this year was to read Russian classic novels. I've already read and reviewed the brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, and Anna Karenina. But one of the big famous Russian novels I had been looking forward to reading for years was Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov. The dog barking outside is distracting me, okay? I don't know why there always needs to be a dog barking or motorbikes racing by the moment I sit down to make a video. Usually, I'm here, I'm reading, I don't hear a sound, but as soon as I turn the camera on, dogs begin to bark. I don't know. Anyway, let's cut here, wait for the dog to shut up, and I'll resume this review. So as I was saying, one of the big famous Russian novels, that I wanted to read for years was Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov. So this novel is from 1859. It's famously about a character who is a sloth. The eponymous character, Ilya Ilyich Oblomov, is a nobleman who spends most of the novel in his room, in his bedroom, usually in bed. So I was curious to see how a novel could have a main character like that and still be compelling. And I have to say that Oblomov, the character, he must be one of the greatest characters in literature. And this novel is the story of his life. Just do not expect a lot of action, right? Instead, you will have pages and pages of dialogue. There is a third-person narrator, like in most 19th century novels, but most of this novel is made up of dialogue. I do not have a lot of time for posh people in real life, I don't mind saying that, but reading about their indolence in satiric writing can be a lot of fun. Oblomov, like all the other Russian classics I have read so far this year or in my life, makes me wish I could read in Russian, because I feel I miss out on so much from reading in translation. And I had this same feeling when I read the Spanish translation of Eugene Onegin, which is a novel written in verse by the 19th century Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Now, this novel was first published in serial form between 1825 and 32. The plot of the novel is so simple that I breezed through it. Now, the main character is a dandy who, in the arrogance of his youth, turns down the beautiful Tatiana, something he will grow to regret later. I never read poetry in translation, but that's the only way I could get to enjoy this Russian classic. And if I enjoyed it in translation, I could only imagine just how great it would be to read this in the original Russian, but I just couldn't do that. Another novel I read in translation that I didn't mind so much was The Joke, which was the first novel by the Czech writer Milan Kundera. This novel was first published in 1967, so almost 1 decade before Kundera went into exile in France, where he still lives. I read the novel in Spanish translation, but if you want to read it in English, there are several translations available, but I read that Kundera only approves of the most recent translation, English translation, which was published in 1992. So if I were you, I would make sure that I read that one. Anyway, The Joke is a satirical novel set in communist Czechoslovakia. There are 4 different points of view, each belonging to one of the main characters, but never, from what I can remember, in the same chapter. So if memory serves, each chapter is told from a different point of view, okay? The Joke is a satire of totalitarian Czechoslovakia. I believe that writers, in general, always use biographical elements in their novels. And in this case, I think only someone who had lived under a totalitarian regime could have written this novel. But The Joke is not about totalitarian regimes in general. It is very specific to Czechoslovakia. Kundera claims to have used stuff from his own life, but also events that happened to some of his friends who then told him about it. The Joke, as I said, is a satirical novel, so you shouldn't feel bad for laughing at some of the episodes told. The central joke that changes the life of the protagonist, a guy called Yaroslav, is something that made me laugh. His girlfriend at the time is one of those humorless bores who always take everything seriously and at face value, and it is in part thanks to that attitude that Yaroslav gets in trouble. And that is all I'm going to say about The Joke, because I'd like you to read it. And I'm curious to read more by Kundera for sure. Like everyone else, I have read his novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, many years ago, so I might reread that at some point, but I'll let you know. I must say I was very impressed by his first novel, The Joke. Well, remember that I said that Kundera now lives in France? Okay, now I want to talk about 2 of the greatest French writers of the 20th century. André Gide and Marguerite Duras. I read 2 very different novels by André Gide. I've been meaning to read his work for years, and now I want to read pretty much everything that he ever wrote. Now, the first novel by Gide I read was The Counterfeiters, or Les Faux Monnayeurs, from 1925. There are so many different plot lines in this novel that I could not summarize the plot in this video. I mean, it would probably take me a whole video to summarize the plot of The Counterfeiters, because there are so many characters whose lives intersect, so many, characters, and at some point their lives and their plot lines intersect. This is another novel I think I should read more than once, but something that I kind of expected because of what I knew about Gide was that there would be gay and bisexual characters in this novel. I just did not expect them to be as many or as open, given that this novel is from the 1920s. So The Counterfeiters, I think, is one of the best novels I read this summer, and if you love literature, you should probably read it. Okay, the second novel by André Gide I read was The Cave of the Vatican, or The Vatican Cellars, in French, Les Caves du Vatican. I read this because I love The Counterfeiters so much, but I must say I was a little bit disappointed by it. Now, I think I should have read other books by Gide first, like The Immoralist or The Narrow Door, or The Narrow Gate, rather. I think that I would read those books soon. I feel like the Vatican Cellars must have been a lot more fun to write than it was to read. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it, but I don't think there was anything that special about it. So this novel can be read as a satire, once again, where a group of fraudsters claims that the Pope has been kidnapped and replaced by a fake Pope. And they go around trying to raise funds to rescue the real Pope. I thought that was vaguely amusing, but what I enjoyed the most was following one of the main characters, Lafcadio, in the second part of the novel. I would say that I probably enjoyed some of the set pieces in the novel more than I did the novel as a whole. And because those set pieces are so great, I still recommend the Vatican Cellars. Okay, now on to the Ravishing of Lol Stein, or in French, Le Ravissement de L.V. Stein by Marguerite Duras, which was the last French novel I read this summer. So this is a very short novel, practically a novella, I'd say, where the main character, a bourgeois woman named Lol Stein, is marked by an event that happened when she was 19. So she was then engaged to be married, but her fiancé left her quite publicly in a humiliating scene that is narrated in the first chapter. Now, the rest of her life will be different from what it was meant to be because of that one event. The Ravishing of Lol Stein is a strangely beautiful and sad novel that I think was the best afternoon read I had this summer. Okay, I ended the summer with 3 novels by the great Italian writer Umberto Eco. I expect some people watching this video would be huge Umberto Eco's fans, and you might be wondering why it took me so long to read anything by him. I have no excuse. But I started with his first and still most famous novel, The Name of the Rose, which came out in 1980. You might have seen the movie adaptation starring Sean Connery. I haven't seen it yet. Anyway, this novel is a mystery that takes place in a medieval monastery in the north of Italy. The mystery is compelling, but not being really a reader of mystery or detective fiction myself, that was not what appealed to me the most about this great novel. What I loved about it were all the digressions, all the discussions about theology and politics. Eco was a medievalist. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the period, and he sure poured a lot of that into his first novel. The result? A chunky tome that I just could not stop reading. I read this novel feverishly over a few hot days and nights, and I just suggest you do the same if you haven't. But, you can read it in winter too, okay? You don't have to read it in the summer, because you will get absorbed by the universe that Eco creates here, and you will forget what is going on around you. You will even forget whether it's hot or cold. I am not one of those people who see reading as escaping from life, but reading The Name of the Rose is one of those very few times I have come close to experiencing that, I think. So if you love to get yourself lost in a book for hours on end, you need to read The Name of the Rose. Then I read Foucault's Pendulum from 1988. I would say that Foucault's Pendulum is even better than The Name of the Rose. So if you liked one of the 2 novels, you would also enjoy the other for sure. But the plots are completely different. In Foucault's Pendulum, we are dealing with conspiracy theories. Eco, I think, does a great job at creating compelling conspiracy theories while at the same time highlighting how stupid and dangerous they are. So I found myself being engrossed by some of the outlandish conspiracy theories the characters in this novel come up with, and then laughing at myself and at how stupid I had been for letting myself get engrossed in them. Expect a lot of dialogue in both novels. There is also a lot of fiction, but not a lot of fiction, a lot of action, but there are pages and pages of dialogue in both novels. I love that, but I know that not everyone will feel the same way about it. Okay, after reading those 2 chunky novels, I made the small mistake of reading Number Zero, which was Eco's last novel. He died in 2016, and Number Zero was published in 2005. And I say that reading this novel was a small mistake because, like Foucault's Pendulum, it also deals with conspiracy theories, and I read it just after I read Foucault's Pendulum. But in this case, the conspiracy theory involves the death, or not, of Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini. But I'm still glad I read it anyway. Number Zero is very short, and I read it in only a couple of sittings, I think. This novel is a satire, once again, this time of Italian tabloid press set in the 1990s, a decade when the media tycoon Silvio Berlusconi was expanding his media empire, but just before he decided to go into politics. So I think that if you're interested in that part of recent Italian and European history, I think you will find this novel extremely engaging and fun. And that brings me to the end of this video, so please let me know if you have read any of these novels and what you thought about them. And if you haven't read any of them, let me know what you have read this summer. I would love to hear from you and discuss summer reading in the comment section down below. This is all from me. Take care.